times. How many times? As many as the number of cells. So that's just a very simple number called 256 power 256 times 256. Not a number you want to have any good relation with. Humongously large number of pictures just for a simple 256 picture. Now the problem of course is every time even a single pixel changes, the picture has changed. So now I need to have a different rule saying if it is this is the picture, this is the action. So in the worst case, you need these many if then else, if then rules. That's why you don't do simple reflex agents. Okay? Next, the other interesting question, of course, then simple reflex agents, you can then say, well, instead of directly going from sensors to the if-then rules, you can go from sensors to features, and features to if-then rules. Features are these higher level properties that you made of the pictures. Okay? For example, then you might say, the if-then rule might say, if there is a car in the picture, in the lane in front of you, then you should slow down, for example. That might be the rule. So then what it's doing is it is interpreting the signal, converting it into features, and then writing condition action rules in terms of those features. If you do that, you could have much fewer rules than this. That is a possibility. In fact, when you do wind up having reflex agents, typically you wind up having reflex agents that operate off of features. So they extract features from the sensory information and then do if-then rules. So it's easy to yell at agents that just go directly from sensors to if-then rules. It's harder to yell at agents that go from sensors to features to if-then rules. But I will yell at them still. And I can do this by saying that if you do not keep track of the world, if you do not know what the current state of the world and the past states of the world are, sometimes you cannot write the right rules. And to me, the best example with respect to driving is this whole blind spot idea. Those of you who know how to drive, you know that there's this whole blind spot part, and what you do is you don't know there's a path of the car. Of course, we are improving it nowadays, but if those of you who have been driving for a while at least, know that there are parts of the car such that if there's another car in that shadow region, you won't see it in your rearview mirror or on the side mirror. And so then you have to do additional actual sensing. But one of the interesting things is, imagine people who are driving on the road most of the time looking like this. They are actually both inefficient and also a traffic hazard. They're saying we are taking care of our blind spot, okay? But they're also very inefficient. What we do, what most of us do, is at one point of time I'll do look like this and there's no car, and 3 seconds later I won't look again. Because I know that cars don't fall from the heavens. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay? I have some theory about how cars materialize. Whereas if you are playing Pac-Man, they might just come out of nowhere. Okay? But on US roads, they don't. So using the background knowledge, you are actually able to reduce the amount of sensing. By the way, this is a crazy thing. Intelligence implies reducing the need for sensing. Okay? Imagine a secretary or imagine an assistant who you might have who just keep on asking silly questions again and again and again and again. You will stop having them as an assistant. You basically assume that you don't want to, by increasing the amount of sensing, you can of course say I'm not doing anything wrong. But actually part of intelligence is to reduce sensing. And sometimes sensing actually has cost. Not just cost of efficiency, but it has dollar cost. Can you think of an example where you might, any sensing you want to do, you would have to pay money? What? Health checkups. Haven't you been to doctors? The first thing doctors will say if you go, different doctors. I mean, in India, if you go to a doctor and you say, I have this huge big, hole in my head, they'll say, put a band-aid, go home. Okay? And here, I go to a doctor and say, look, I have a small dot on my nose. They'll say, how about a CAT scan and an interferometry and some additional 15 other tests, just to be sure. Why do they change that? First of all, in this case, essentially, if they don't do the test, they will have malpractice suit on their hands. If they do the test, your insurance is paying the money. So you change the cost structure. But in general, if the same agent is paying for, the same system is paying for everything, then over-testing is a very costly enterprise. Every test costs money. And part of it is when somebody comes okay, by the way, I'm trying to use this right now, that the most famous saying that every doctor is told, I'm told, because I'm not a doctor, a real doctor, not a medical doctor, is when you hear hoofs, think horses, not zebras. Have any of you heard this? When you hear hoofs, think horses, not zebras. Okay, when you see somebody coming into your office with a runny nose, don't do Ebola test on them. Even though, if you have Ebola, not only your nose, lots of other things will also be running. Okay, and it is a definite symptom of Ebola virus to have a runny nose. But in Tempe, people should be expecting runny nose means common cold, which is a horse, as against Ebola, which is a zebra. Okay, now what if I only my performance gets decided not on the cost of the treatment, but on whether or not if I ever made any mistake. In which case, I have every reason to just increase the number of tests. And that's again, good doctors don't necessarily ask you to do a huge number of tests. Okay, so intelligence does involve reducing the number of tests because they can use the background knowledge to figure out from a few tests what is the more likely thing that you want to do. Okay, so that was this idea that sensing sometimes you want to reduce. Now getting back to the place where we got to here, which is blind spot. In the case of blind spot, if you keep track of how the world is evolving, then you don't have to keep on looking every 3 microseconds into what is happening. You can fill in the blanks. I checked 3 milliseconds back, there was no car. After that, no new lanes came and nothing showed up in my rear view mirror, and there was no entry point into the road, so there is nobody to look back. You may not think that you are doing all this reasoning, but you are, in essence. That's how you reduce the amount of time you keep looking back. To be able to do that, suddenly I need 3 more boxes. Just to deal with blind spots, you need 3 more boxes. You need to keep track of the state of the world. You need to keep track of an idea of how the world evolves. Where did I use the idea of how the world evolves in my blind spot example? Cars don't drop from the sky. Right? If I'm in an environment where cars do drop from the sky, I should be careful. Right? So I have to have an idea of how the world evolves. And then I also have to have an idea of what my actions do. For example, after you look, then after about half an hour, you took an exit and you're on a different road altogether. You can't just say, I already checked half an hour back, I don't need to check anymore. That makes no sense. Because you know that your action has changed your environment. You're in a very different part of the environment. So you need to keep track of the state, how the world evolves, and what your actions do. Those are all models. Those are things that you know about the world. Model is prior knowledge about the world. Okay? If you have that, and then you have condition action rules, then you can be a much more impressive reflex agent. Much more impressive reflex agent. Okay? But notice how many extra things came. State, how the world evolves, what my actions do. Now when I put those things, a big question would be, how do I represent state? How do I represent how the world evolves? How do I represent what my actions do? When I say represent, at the minimum think of data structures. In a program you need to have data structures. We'll think a little more abstractly in terms of the way the knowledge is represented. Okay? In particular, we will talk about black box models where each state is an indivisible entity. Actions will just take you from states to states. Those are called atomic models. Then we'll go to an idea called states are made up of state variables, and state variables take different values, and so that's how states change from one state to another. So there's structure to the state. Then you go beyond that and say states are actually made up of entities and the relationship between those entities, objects and the relations between the objects. Okay? That would be essentially in what object-oriented programming, that's called predicate calculus or factored representations. Okay? And then you can go beyond that. You can also start talking about functions and quantification, and whenever you do that sort of jumps in the representation, what you wind up doing between black box models to factored models, the metaphor you want to keep in mind is assembly language, C language, and some other even higher level language. What makes a language higher level? Every higher level language eventually gets compiled into the assembly language. The reason you want to write your programs in higher level language is because what becomes this big assembly code can be written in this small and higher level code. Right? What can be written in a single sentence? You don't know what, some of you know what it says. It says, for all x loves x, father of x. Simple sentence. Okay? Now, I can actually have in this world a single entity, constant, love. Okay? So what does this statement say really in terms of love? If I just compile it down, assembly language, you will say, well, loves, love, father of, love. Right? Anything more? Loves, father of, love, father of, love. How many of these can I write? Infinite number. So slight distinction. Higher level language never becomes infinitely large amount of assembly code for you guys. But first order logic, when compiled to predicate logic, can be giving rise to infinitely large theories. So on one hand, you go for higher level. On one hand, you can go for higher level representations for compactness. But on the other hand, technically speaking, actually we will also talk about situations where we will look at representations that if you reason at this level, you could be making infinitely more compact assertions than at the lower level. Okay? But the idea is the same. You want to go higher level to reduce, to make things compact. Having said that, we will first look at how to do planning and reasoning with black box models first. Just as when you do programming, actually that's not true, but when you are a CS student, mostly you will do assembly at some point of time. Normally you do a higher level language first and then do assembly. Okay, but in logic you do predicate logic first and then first order logic. So similarly here we will start with black box models first and then look at factored models for any kind of a problem. Okay, then up until this actually the biggest change went from this picture to this picture because 3 boxes came into being. And that basically brought in this whole notion of representation for the models. That's the bread and butter of a lot of things that happen in this course. Okay, but in the next point, what we will do is instead of condition action rules, which to say this is the action you should do in this state, you should know why are you doing this action in this state, because there is a top level goal that you are trying to achieve, and so I assume that that goal is compiled into my if-then rules. There is an indirect, implicit top level goal. What you would really like to do is instead of condition action rules, I should let the agent figure out what is the goal it's trying to achieve. And having decided what goal it's trying to achieve, then it actually tries to make its own if-then rules. Instead of the if-then rules, it actually tries to simulate the world, saying, if I do these actions, these are the states that I will get to, and if I am in that state, then I can do these other actions, up until the point I'll get to a state where the goals are satisfied. And so based on that, I can figure out what action should I be doing now, such that later on I can do this action, and then this action, and then finally reach the goal state. That's basically search. You are searching for a sequence of actions to do such that you can reach a goal state. If you're doing searching, then you don't have these condition action rules. But the searching essentially makes the architecture more flexible. You can change the goal and you will still know, the agent still knows what's the right action. But there can be situations where if the agent realizes that its goal is always the same, then rather than every time be extremely surprised and starting from scratch as to what should be the actions to reach the goal, after a while it might just decide, to heck with it, below these goals I'll also put condition action rules for this particular goal, so that I'm sort of memoizing. Memoizing reasoning. If I did some reasoning, I don't want to do it again. If I don't want to do it again, I'll just remember it as a condition action rule. You see what I'm saying? So it's better to start with this more flexible agent, which knows how to specialize itself to this when needed, than to start this way all the time. Okay? So that basically is the big architecture we've been talking most of the time about. So if you look at this architecture, then what happens in this course can be sort of explained in the following ways. You need a representation to talk, representation language for representing states, the knowledge about how the world evolves, knowledge about what my actions do, and knowledge about what my goals are. And those mechanisms are things like black box models. First we'll look at those. Then we'll look at logic. Then we'll look at probabilistic logic. Okay, those are representation models. Similarly, when you have a representation, you need to reason with it. You need to figure out, if I were to do these actions in these particular state representations, then I'll get these other states. And then sequence those actions to reach a goal. And that is essentially the kind of problems, those are the what we call inference algorithms. We look at search, and we look at planning, and we look at probabilistic inference. When we do those pieces, we are essentially talking about how to do these algorithms. Okay? And then the final question, somebody, I don't know if they're here right now, is where is learning entering the picture? I already just told you one simple learning, just now. Memoizing. Memoizing is learning. Remembering that I've done this and not having to redo it but just giving the answer right away is learning. But much more interesting is how do I fill in these boxes? The state, how the world evolves and what my actions do. Those boxes, how do I fill those in? Currently, I'm not saying anything, so you write it yourself. You, the programmer. But in the case of learning agent, it essentially figures out the model of the world through its experience. So learning is all over the place. Learning is on this side because it learns the models. Learning is also can be this side because the algorithm can be made more efficient because you see that the algorithm is doing the same sub-computations again and again and again. That's learning too. So with respect to this simple architecture, we already have, what's going on in the course that I've shown that way. Okay. And the last thing I should mention, and then we'll take a break for 10 minutes, and then get back, is so basically this one's actually showing that a learning agent essentially can be put on top of this kind of an agent, which keeps track of how to update its models. Okay, we'll get to that later. One last thing I wanted to say is actually, it's in the small print here. Instead of goals specifically, one interesting point we can make is that instead of goals, you just have utility function, which just says if you are in this state, you have this much expected utility. Okay, and goals will become a special case of general utility. Okay, and so you can actually start talking about utility-based agents rather than goal-based agents. In terms of the next couple of weeks, first we will start talking about black box models, search with goal-based agents. That's what is A-star search, and that's what is uninformed search and so on. Then we will go to something called Markov decision processes, which makes a huge jump on the textbook from chapter 3 to chapter 17. Okay, and Markov decision processes are again atomic models, but they do two very interesting extensions to the simple search models. One, they allow for the model to have uncertainty. So when you do an action in state S, it will give you a distribution of the new states. That means you will be in state S1 with probability 0.7, S2 with probability 0.2, S3 with probability 0.05, and so on. So there is uncertainty. The second part is Markov decision processes also allow you to specify rewards for just visiting states. Instead of talking about goals, you talk about reward functions, which is for each state there is a number, that's the amount of pleasure you get just for going into the state. And then you can talk about the notion of a value of state to be the expected amount of pleasure you can get when you start your peregrinations from this state. Peregrinations means wanderings from this state. Okay, and that's Markov decision processes. And once you start talking about Markov decision process or search, in both those cases, we'll assume the models are known completely in the beginning, and so we are looking at pure inference problems. If you start learning the model during execution, especially in the context of MDP setting, it becomes reinforcement learning. And to make you wake up, reinforcement learning is what AlphaGo did to win over Lee Sedol. Okay? So we can very quickly get to a point where we can understand actually what's making things tick. But this reasonably dry discussion of agent types, environment types, and the trade-offs that are there that you may not have appreciated now will come to haunt you, because every time when you're doing something, you have to ask yourself, why this algorithm, why this particular way of representation, and each of those trade-offs can be understood in the type of discussion we do. Okay, 10-minute break, we'll be back.